Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Huang, the Hong Kong account manager for Just Log In. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our sixth webinar in our business continuity series. So as many of us face obstacles during these tough times, it's still important to really hire, retain, and nurture top talent. I mean, it's said that cash flow is the lifeblood of businesses, but it's really the people and employers who are the arteries that make the business go forward. So the objective of today's masterclass is really to share best practices for engaging and maintaining a healthy pipeline of talent and to nurture the ones that we have so that they stay and are with us, keeping businesses going, especially when we reopen economies, which is actually starting to happen in Hong Kong as cases lower. So with that, before I introduce our lovely panelists, let me go over some housekeeping. So first off, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A tab in the bottom. Also, we have a webinar next week as well, webinar 7. Really cool speakers, Chuhao from Just Log In, Christian from Xero, and it's going to be discussing moving from paper finance to cloud solutions, especially while everyone's working from home. Last but not least, there'll be a feedback form after the webinar, so please fill it out so we know how to improve for the future. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today. So first off, we'll have Julio Orr, founder and CEO of Happier, discussing employer branding, best tips, especially right now. Even if your company isn't hiring, it's still really important to manage your brand and ensure that people are engaged. Up next will be Christine Liu, head of partner acquisition at RecruiterPal. She'll be discussing how to recruit during these times, especially when we're not in the office face-to-face, so how to recruit remotely. Last but not least, we have Canon Chatier from Avance, who will be discussing how to screen and ensure you're hiring the right people, even if we can't meet them face-to-face. So how to really ensure that they are a good fit for the company. So without further ado, let me introduce Julio. So Julio, you are up.
Thank you, Thomas. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So hi, I'm Julio. I'm from Australia, and I've been in Asia for the last 14 years now. So just bear with me as I share the screen. Yes, so 14 years in Asia, and so I spent 10 years or so in recruitment. I started and sold my recruitment business, and the last 3 years has been in HR tech. So I'm the founder and CEO of Happier, which is a next-gen career platform that helps companies attract and hire millennials and Gen Z talent. And we do this through creating a content-rich website that gives candidates greater transparency in their job search. And we're also building AI technology into the platform through things like personality testing and video analysis. So yeah, so today I'm going to talk about how to build a strong employer brand. And I think first it'll be good just to talk a bit about the context of, like, one thing is like what drove us to create Happier, and secondly just like why it's such a big topic at the moment. So the first point would be around, today more than 50% of the workforce are millennials and Gen Z. In the next 5 years, that's going to be up to 75%. So it's such a huge segment of the workforce. It's really hard to sort of ignore. And if you think about the generations today, a lot of them are born with mobiles in their hand. Secondly, behaviors have changed. So, a long time ago, I think it used to be more job seekers, but today we're seeing people behave more like consumers. So if you think about how people research, their favorite clothing brand, their restaurant, or whatever brand it might be, they will just go into search mode. And I think we're all sort of quite familiar with that. So it's no different to the job search. Candidates, when they hear about your job or your company, they will want to go and find you on Google or social media. And one of the questions that I always like to ask companies is, if a candidate went to Google you, what would they find? And I get them to go through and see. The third thing is priorities. So priorities have shifted. I think today candidates are putting more emphasis on what's the purpose, what's the mission, what's the culture, the team, the people. So money is still very important, but certainly there's been a bit of a shift in the priorities. And I think it's going to be very interesting after COVID-19, how companies are going to respond, because candidates or employees are going to argue that, they've been working pretty productively, working from home, the flexibility. So they're going to want to push to kind of maintain that. So how companies respond to that will sort of shape their culture and also their employer brand. So I think the companies that are really looking at the different tools that they can use today are going to be the companies that are going to be able to sort of bulletproof their employer branding. And I think everybody today who's here, I think you guys are already ahead because you're already thinking about what you can do. So in terms of employee branding, so I talk to a lot of companies on a weekly basis, from startups through to corporates, and have a lot of conversations about employee branding, a lot of questions. And these are 6 sort of facts that really like hit me as to why we need to pay attention to employer branding. And I'm just going to share with you. And then afterwards, I'm also going to share some tips that can get you started with employer branding. So the first tip is, well, the first fact is you don't pick talent, talent picks you. So we've seen a growing increase in the cost of hiring. So it's been reported that 76% of companies actually find it's costing more to get talent. And we can see that's because candidates have been more picky. You know, a long time ago, they would jump hurdles to get into MNCs, but you know, now they're happy to join an early stage startup because they align with the vision. So it's getting a lot harder and you need to put a lot more resource into actually getting talent. So it's becoming more expensive. The cost is rising. So I think the tip here is, you know, start to approach new candidates as you would your customers. Think about when candidates are coming to your career site, when they're coming to you, what's their experience? And once you can start to sort of approach them as a customer, you'll start to see different results. So the second one is 43% decrease in hiring costs. So according to LinkedIn, this is a huge, you know, that's halving your costs purely by having a strong employer brand. And we can see that's the case because, you know, if you don't have a strong employer brand, you probably need to spend more resources to actually go and get candidates to come to you. You also, if there's any sort of negative reviews out there, you probably have to spend more money just to attract them. So it's definitely, you know, costing more money by not having a stronger employer brand. And shockingly, 75% of candidates will check you out, your employer brand, before they apply. So I guess the rule here is, you know, the brand has to be attractive first to then recruit the right candidates. The third fact is candidates trust employers 300% more. So, you know, this is huge. We do a lot of videos for companies. And quite often the question that they ask is who to have in the video. And it's always very clear that you need to have the employees there because employees are, you know, the candidates are able to relate to employees a lot more and they kind of more representative of who you are and your culture. So definitely always, you know, make sure you're sharing your stories for employees. The next fact is 94% of candidates are likely to apply if an employer brand is managed. So that means, you know, if they go to your social media, they go to your LinkedIn, they go to your career site, that it's actually updated, someone's looking after it. So it's surprising how many candidates will actually, you know, run away if they sort of feel like it's not kept. And also, you know, in terms of the recruiting speed, which is actually very key when you're recruiting, you can often lose candidates out to competitors. So, you know, 55% of job seekers abandon applications after reading negative reviews. I actually had this a lot when I was, you know, recruiting, and, you know, candidates would get excited about opportunities and the next day they would come back to me and tell me they wanted to pull out of the process. And it was always because they heard a negative review or, you know, they went on Glassdoor. So I think that's something that's really important. It's you know, managing, you know, the Glassdoor, managing reviews, definitely can increase how quickly you can hire people. And then this is my favorite one. So 70% of hiring managers have successfully hired with social. We actually hired someone in the last couple of months through Instagram. It probably does work better for like more creative. So we hired a videographer, but we were able to get a bit of an idea of who they were, look at their portfolio a little bit. And it's something that's actually untapped in Asia. There's so much opportunity here. And one of the key things is, you know, on LinkedIn, job boards, candidates tend to go there when they're a bit more active. Whereas they're always on Facebook, they're always on Instagram, because that's, you know, where they go for a bit of sort of relax. So The other thing is that with LinkedIn, the engagement rate tends to be about 30%, whereas Facebook, Instagram, generally you have more than 80% of people going to those platforms every single day. So I'll go into a little bit more detail around how we can work with social to help to improve your employer brand. But yeah, definitely social is definitely something that you can leverage a lot. So what's the moral of the story? So it's three things. So get active, get creative. So in getting creative, just experiment a little bit, because employer branding is different for every company. So you do have to try out a few different things. And really important is just get going. You can always start on low-hanging fruit like Glassdoor. Okay, so after sharing all these sort of compelling facts, you're sort of asking like, what now? So just in terms of a couple of steps that you can take that will just at least get you going. So firstly is, sit down with your team and figure out what makes your company different. Every company has that 10% that makes you different, or the DNA. And it's important to get your employees involved as well, because the employer branding is built, externally, but also internally, because if your employees feel happy and proud to be working in your company, they're going to tell other people. So get them involved in the process. You'll be able to more accurately define what it is that makes you different. So then the next step is to put that into a credible snapshot, to share that story with candidates. So you need to sort of think about how you're going to do it, whether it's photos, videos, where you're going to put it. So then you can start to create it and get it out there. So once you do those two steps, then the next step is about what platforms are you going to use. So today I'm just going to focus on social media, because I mentioned I feel like it's very untapped. We actually use social media a huge amount and we get a lot of success from it. So with social media, I think the first step is that you need to get your employees involved. And the best thing to do is, I think if your employees are able to share content, it also leverages their network as well. And then also make sure that the content that you're putting there is authentic. Candidates want to really sort of feel something that's sort of real. The other thing is, because it is Facebook and Instagram, you've got to think of like where that person is, what they're doing. And usually Facebook, Instagram, you're doing in your own time, you're sort of in that sort of relaxed mode. So you want to sort of be more entertained. You probably have a lower attention span. So you need to just make sure that the content is not the same as what you put on LinkedIn. So, typically short videos, like 10, 15 seconds. Sometimes, if you're putting in photos, make them a little bit fun or, interesting. Don't sort of put job descriptions or we're hiring or something like that. I think with social media, you've got to do a bit more of a subtle approach in, show them your culture and then get them to see what you are like and then be interested in your company. So, I have an example here of SaaS in the US, a data analytics software company. So they've been ranked top 10 for 12 years in the Forbes best companies to work for. So I've got the Instagram here, but it's a good example, and they identified their culture as benevolence and flexibility. So when you go to their Instagram, there's examples of that culture, and they've been very good at getting people to sort of resonate with that and then sort of apply to jobs. So yeah, definitely get onto social media and also get your employees involved and experiment a little bit. And you have to see what works and what doesn't work. And as you find things that work, you just keep doing more of that until you sort of have a little bit of a sort of consistency and theme. Last week, I also had a company ask me about, they're a small company, so they mentioned they don't have much content. But I think for small companies, you can still do the first steps. You can look at Glassdoor, you can look at your career page, you can look at different platforms that you can leverage. So you don't need to do everything. You can start small, but always be doing something just to create a bit of employee branding. This is just some quick examples. So you can see that you can just do very simple things. So Microsoft, there's like a thank you post-it note. I think we've seen these in the offices before. So, it's about just trying to capture those real moments in the office. General Electric, I really like them because, they've been around 150 years. It's surprising that such an old company could be, so ahead with social media, but they use a lot of short videos, and they get a lot of the employees just to talk about what they do. So this gentleman here, he loves welding, so he shared a little bit of a video about what he loves doing. So now the other thing is also about how to make your job listings more attractive. So if you look on the left, so this is how listings were like 20, 30 years ago, and they still are today. And that was when we had dial-up internet. Things were slow, so it's no surprise that we did have to put things in text, right? But you know, today we have fast internet, we have so much like technology. So it's really about creating your job descriptions to make it more engaging. So think about add photos to it, add video to it. And also, you know, candidates, they're always on Facebook and Instagram, so they're used to seeing things in a rich way. So they also want to have that experience with when they're looking at your jobs. So finally, now employer branding is such a big topic. I just want to leave you with this. So I think something that you can also do is do an employer branding audit. So it's just going through all the different items of employer branding. I can also send you a checklist as well, which you can use as a guide. I'll share my email in a second, but it just helps you to go through systematically and figure out what you're doing and what you're not doing. Once you figure out some of the gaps, then you can turn that into like an action plan. And just to sort of thank you and for Just Log In, as you're an audience of Just Log In, you know, we're happy to share the checklist with you and also offer like an employer branding audit intro. So just feel free to email me. You can see my email address here, and you know, happy to help. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julio, for sharing really great tips and statistics on employer branding. Just to answer some questions real quick about the presentation, we will be sending a recording afterwards, so no need to take pictures or screenshots of the presentations. We'll send them out to you. Up next, we have Christine Liu from Recruiter Pal. All right, Christine, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for making time for the masterclass. I'm really glad to, be on the panel together with Julio and also Kanan. And we would love to talk about how e-recruiting can have changed candidate engagement. So a little bit about Recruiter Pal. We are the software specialist in recruitment tech and also in Southeast Asia. So we are actually in the business of helping hiring teams to gain the superpowers that they need to connect seamlessly to talent. Okay. And let's look at what has happened right recently. These are unusual times. We often, are used to hearing the phrase digital transformation across the organization. We banter about it a lot, but the truth is there has not been a greater driving force for digital transformation across the board than the coronavirus pandemic, right? Suddenly, yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt you. I think you need to share your screen.
Oh. Sorry, give me a moment.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem at all. So sorry. Let me just do that. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Is everyone able to see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Thanks, Thomas. So, overnight, we have a lot of employers that suddenly have to grapple with a brave new world. And they have to have a rapidly evolving policies from splitting teams to all the way to having a lockdown where the majority of the workforce are actually working from home. So what has this actually done in terms of the changes for e-recruiting is the fact that, when you're working from home, there is no office, right? So we were very amused when we look at some of the other industries like real estate. Some of the agents are actually going around selling virtual tours. So the equivalent of an onboarding process is that, typically a person that has been recently recruited and offered they would be, welcome into the office. They'll be able to see their colleagues and, make their rounds saying, hello, I'm new to the workplace. This has all changed in a matter of a few months. And we find that the recruitment landscape has also changed considerably. Within the past few months, we have actually compared the data on our recruitment platform because we amass the recruitment opportunities across Southeast Asia, and comparing to what we saw in 2019 for the same quarter, the number of job opportunities has dropped dramatically. That is not to say that there is no hope and there's no hiring. There are actually healthy hiring in some of the essential services companies that we are supporting. Unfortunately, the landscape is unbalanced in the fact that certain industries are harder hit by the pandemic than others. So you do find that for the applicants or the candidates that are within the job market today, the interest, or what we call as the intent to apply for each candidate, is much higher. So that would actually translate to the fact that not only are they applying more positions, the type of positions that they apply to is also cross-ranging, and they are a lot more amenable to the opportunities out there in the market, simply because the volume of hiring activity or recruitment opportunities are not as high as before. So in a nutshell, if you are out there as an employer and you have the capacity to hire, this is the time. This is the golden moment where you can actually swoop in and find really good talents that for reasons other than their own talent, their industry was unfortunately not able to cater for the drop in their product and service offering, and they were unfortunately let go. So there is a huge unbalance whereby there is a lot of great talent out there vis-a-vis the kind of opportunities that are available. Right. At the same time, we do find that working from home actually creates a new sort of paradigm for e-recruiting. Why we say that is because typically when the majority of the workforce are working in offices, so i.e. normal times, what happens is that you find that gainfully employed candidates would often have to plan ahead of time. They have to arrange for interviews, by taking leave and then going to the workplace, to meet up with the recruiter. This has changed actually for the better, in the sense that now that everybody is in a lockdown, you're in the comfort of your own home. So you can actually at any time, you're like, okay, tomorrow you want to have an interview? Sure, tomorrow I will, be ready for the interview. Right? So that has greatly accelerated the recruitment process flow. But of course, there have often been a lot of people who actually comment that, hey, face-to-face, having the person or candidate turn up at your office is slightly different. And it's better. I think the underlying, comments that we actually saw from some of the Q&A questions that have, the audience has actually put up is that, having a e-interview might miss out on some of the gestures, the nuances of candidates. That may be true. And I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about is that why is it that, even particularly in such times, right, like what Julio mentioned and what Thomas also, emphasized, that even though at this period of time, the companies, may not be actively hiring in the volumes that they are used to, but they shouldn't still let up on either their employer brand and also, more importantly, how they engage with the candidate, right? So, often we get questions about what's the difference between candidate engagement and candidate experience. So candidate experience is actually a shorter subset of the journey, which is basically the process that in part of a recruitment workflow, the experience of going through from application all the way to, whether they subsequently met up with the recruiter for an interview, or subsequently whether they are rejected or hired. Right? But candidate engagement goes beyond that. It's actually the process and measurement of the communications that you continue to have with the candidate, regardless of whether you have an active position available. And, of course, the mediums that we have available to us, the more traditional ones are like face-to-face, a phone call, text. And these days, because of the lockdown that's happening in Singapore and across the parts of Southeast Asia, so there's a lot more emphasis on e-interviews to catch up with the candidates. So one of the things that we think about, why is it important for employers to pay attention to a proper, candidate experience and therefore a good candidate engagement workflow, is that having a broken one has actually very big downstream impact, not just on your employer brand, but actually as a whole, what people think of you, as your brand, as your company, right? What a lot of studies have actually emphasized on is that job seekers at the end of the day could be consumers, right? And they could be a good ambassador for your company, but when they have had a bad candidate experience, almost half of them would say that they would never apply to the company again. But what's more shocking is that close to a quarter of them say that they will even go the extra mile to tell other candidates that they know of and say that, hey, that company is not worth working for and you shouldn't apply to this company. And if you are a recruiter, would you know whether there are such negative ambassadors out there in the midst of a job market? You wouldn't know that. You only see that your pipeline seems to have lesser and lesser applications out there, and you'll be wondering, like, hey, have I not invested enough in my company brand? But actually, like what Julio mentioned earlier, the reviews of friends and your family actually stands a lot more holding power than what the company says they are about, right? So you wouldn't want to have this negative impact affecting not just the recruiting flow, and the downstream of the amount of talent that you can get from your pipeline, but also your company brand as a whole. So that is really how recruitment may be a silo function looked upon within a portion of the company, but as an organization, it actually has an oversized impact on the marketing, the branding of the company. So what a lot of times we talk about, that now that the recruitment landscape is unbalanced, you have a lot more leverage on in the recruitment market because you have a big pool of great talents out there for you to choose from, and not so many employees are out there actively recruiting, right? But that doesn't give you the license to be really, hold the high and mighty power play over your candidate, right? Some of the bad behaviors that are typically what constitute a bad candidate experience, things like not having read the resume of the person before the interview, or appearing very impersonal or even arrogant. It actually comes off as like the fact that the candidate has to go to only your company, but actually that's not the case. A candidate can easily apply to different companies, and if you are in the market for the best talent, we are never about quantity, we're always about the quality of hire. You will want to make sure that you come off as being the best suited and choice employer for that candidate. So this is something that we hope that would be taken into consideration, even though the market is currently playing in your advantage as an employer, right? So in terms of e-recruiting, we wanted to provide you in this masterclass a very short guide. One of the things that we first wanted to emphasize on is to be systematic, right? Why is that the case? Is because a lot of times recruiters without a proper system would find it a mess, right? When it comes to collating candidate information, some of it could be inside one of the job portals, and the other one could be coming in from your email inbox. It's really hard for the recruiter to make sense of things, much less talking about engaging the candidate, right? It is not uncommon for recruiters to simply put out the message that says only shortlisted candidates will be notified. This is not because they were not willing. This is more likely because they were not able to, figure out how many people have applied, what was their candidate status at any one point in time, because the candidate could be applying to multiple positions or being considered for multiple positions. So that's why we actually recommend the use of a tool. A tool like Recruiter Pal would actually help you to, have a single source of truth, right? You can put in the candidate information, you will understand their recruitment or their application history. You can make notes about, the interviews. You can get, collaborative hiring. You can involve your teammates to figure out, what really were their key takeaways from the candidate, from e-interviews and so on. And it makes it really easy for you to issue out e-interview links via the system and get the candidates to quickly, accept the appointment link, right? The second point that we wanted to talk about is to take the vantage point as a friend, right? A lot of times, recruiters may be tempted to say that, hey, we are only talking to the candidate up till the point where our position is filled, right? After the position is filled, that's it, right? That's the end of the relationship with the candidate. We actually beg to differ. The really, really good recruiters often find themselves with a very rich talent pipeline behind them. And the philosophy that they've often shared with us is that they treat the candidates as a friend. There are, very tangible benefits to doing that, because again, a candidate doesn't exist in a silo or a vacuum. They have friends, they have family, and they could be even your end product users, right? So what happens is that if you have a good relationship with them and they are likely to be working in a related industry, even if they are not joining your organization, there is very, very real tangible benefits to, continually engage them and find out, whether they have joined a competitor or whether they have joined, a related industry, and you can look towards potential collaboration. The other thing is also, of course, tapping on the network effect. In the next recruitment opportunity that you may have, you can actually look towards this candidate who may be happily employed somewhere else, and you can ask them, hey, you know of anyone who is maybe perhaps unhappy at your company or are looking towards a new change in environment? And then that's where you can also get a very, very relevant candidate that would also have a positive ambassador at the back of your, your arsenal of, telling the person that says, hey, I have a really good relationship with the recruiter at your firm, and this is a really good company. I wish I would work for them. It's not for the fact that I was already employed somewhere else, but you should really try out for this application. So having somebody on your side, telling that friend or a family member that your organization is a good choice employer, that is really true gold, right? So we talk about the fact that today, at least in Singapore, in a lot of countries within Southeast Asia, we are entering into a recession and a rather protracted long winter, if I may add, right? So one of the things that we all often, wanted to point out is that even if you have 0 vacancies, right, your company has put out a notice that there is a hiring freeze. Do not waste the time during this period. Try to build your talent pipeline. Have a career page that can talk about how good or why is it great to be part of this organization, and so that even if there's no positions, you can actually tap on a feature like for Recruiter Pal, you can actually drop your resume with any of our employers through the career page, and they can actually have a passive way of building the talent pipeline. So that when the recovery period kicks in, you are not in a scramble to find good talent. You actually have a head start by interacting with these candidates, right? So the other thing that we often talk about is, of course, the talent own network, but also the existing workforce that you have. Tap on them, right, for referrals. Get them to share about like what Julio mentioned. Get them to tell them a little bit about what their work is like, how wonderful it is to work in their organization. The third point that we also thought to share is a lot of the employers have actually started looking at this, is that there are a lot of support for running career trials, or even for fresh graduates, you offer them internships or even job sharing arrangements. So the whole idea is that you can't probably tell 100% of whether it's a good candidate fit from just a e-recruiting interview. So what happens is that the best way to assess a candidate would be to bring them in and have them contribute to your workplace, right? And through that process of even a part-time engagement through job sharing, you'll be able to find out a lot more about the person, whether it's a good cultural fit because the person is actively working with your teammates. Even if it's working from home, it's a team, virtual team meeting, but they actually get to contribute work and you can see the quality of the person's work. So that's something that we will highly encourage companies to consider since, we find that pretty effective for some of the clients that have already started doing such arrangements to get started. So I think that's all we have, and we will actually pass on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Christine. I guess even as the paradigm shifts during COVID-19, we still have a lot of important practices to keep, such as building and maintaining that healthy pipeline. Just to add on as well, JustLogin has an integration with RecruiterPal. So once someone's hired through RecruiterPal, the user account will be automatically added to the JustLogin account. Up next, we have Canon from Avance. It's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning to those from Europe, and good afternoon, good evening from those from Asia. You survived. So I'm the third speaker, the last speaker for the day, probably between you and your evening break. So I'm going to talk, before I talk about myself, I think now that we've heard some good stuff from Julio and Christine about employer branding and candidate engagement, right? And these are very essential components of your employee life cycle. But there are also other critical components you need to consider, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. And before that, just a quick introduction of myself. So I've been working, for the last 24 years. Born and bred in Singapore, worked, first job was in Canada, and then moved on to the US, and then worked in Poland, Europe for a while, and then came back, set up a family, and then now running a tech-enabled company. So although typically people think Indian guy means must be an IT guy, not true. So although I did engineering, from very first day, I've been only in commercial positions, leadership positions. But of course, the Indian blood runs, so there's always a tech angle to everything. So I always look at everything in a tech perspective. So I've talked about, based on my leadership experience, minus the cultural differences, people actually work and think pretty much the same around the globe. So I've shared on how to handle people, how to digitally transform their mindset. Now, especially with COVID-19, it became like a catalyst for people to become more digitalized. I think a few months ago, people didn't even use the platform like Zoom. Now everyone's doing this, so it's great. And there's a lot of other ways to be digitalized as well, right? So I've talked about this in various TV, magazines, and all the newspapers and all that. Again, in this talk, I'm going to be focused mainly on the screening part before you hire. And it's an entire employee life cycle, right? So Julio talked about employer branding. So you've got to brand your company attractively, brand attractiveness, right? To bring in the right people. And then Christine talked about how to engage with the candidates. But it's also important, especially now, to make sure that you're hiring the right and safe people, because I think a lot of, I'm sure in this group, and it's great to see more than 200 people now in this group watching this. There's the medium enterprises or the small enterprises, you just can't afford to make a wrong hire, because one wrong hire can just wipe out all your essential earnings, reputational damages. We just can't afford that. So you really need to make sure that whoever you are socializing with or engaging with, you need to make sure you're hiring the right people and are they safe? Because we have seen that out of every 10 resumes, about 3 to 4 resumes do have problems. And it's very worrying. I'll share that with you. And again, because of a global footprint, it's quite consistent across the globe. And after hiring, you also want to make sure that they are productive, right? You need to make sure you onboard them with very engaging programs, and you continuously develop them using technology as well. So although it's all very services-based, but it's all heavily tech-enabled. But the focus of this discussion is going to be mainly on the screening part. But before that, let's do a poll. Let's just get interactive, right? It's 3+. And I know before you get your coffee, it's good to get this poll, make you do some work. So how do you thoroughly check out your potential candidate now? So do you do the traditional character reference checks? So if I'm joining your company, I'm going to give you references of my friends. I make sure I buy him beer last night so he said good things about me. Or would you, number two, call and verify the details with the previous employer, HR, and supervisors, hopefully after verifying that they are the real HR people, the real employers, right? And of course, make sure the company really exists, because we see a lot of this so-called companies which don't exist, girlfriend act as HR, friends act as supervisors. So, I mean, this got to be done properly as well. Or the third option is, do you conduct a very detailed background check on anyone before you hire? Like you check out the criminal background, do they have any financial history that you need to be concerned about? Are the certificates real? Do they have dubious employment history? Have they inflated the employment? And my earlier two friends talked a lot about social media. So is the social media clean? Is the footprint good? Footprint clean to hire? So let's vote this. I can't vote. My panelists can't vote, but the rest of the 200 folks in this call can vote. So go ahead for the vote. And wow, great to see. So very close fight. I see that about 57% do character reference checks, and another 58% do the verification previous employers. Very few people do detailed background check. I didn't not expect this. This is completely expected, because not many people know that there's such a service available. They think all you can deal with is only character reference check, which is not enough, which is not even, to me, character reference check, don't even do it. It's just pointless. Second one is good. Of course, you're going to verify with the previous employer. So what are the other tools out there that you can use to make sure you really know who you hire? Of course, you don't know what you don't know, but you better know who you hire, all right? So let me just share that in the next slide. Oops, okay. All right, so I'm sure you all watched the movie Catch Me If You Can. It's still running on Netflix, where DiCaprio changes jobs from a lawyer to a doctor to a sailor to all kinds of very high-risk positions, because he was never checked. He was never background checked. And here I'm showing you a few high-profile cases of people who were not checked and they were hired. And once they were hired, what happened? They had obviously some integrity issues. Some even had security issues. And you're possibly causing unnecessary reputational damage to your company, financial damages, security damages. You can just Google. In fact, you just Google my name for a start. I've talked about this in various conferences. And then you just put a Google background checks, or risks of not doing it, risks of not knowing who you hire. You'll have tons of case studies, right? So it's really important to know who you hire. You need to verify what they put up in the resume, right? And you also need to make sure that you fulfill your compliance obligations, right? Of course, data privacy is very important. Like our clients in Europe put us through a lot of tests to make sure you're GDPR compliant. In Singapore, you have PDPA. In Hong Kong, you have Data Privacy Act as well. So all those of, most of you dialing in from different countries, you all have your respective data privacies to worry about. So you need to make sure you do it in a compliant way. And there's also a Gallup study which shows that people who are background checked tend to stay with the company for a longer time, which means your staff attrition is reduced. So your typical two headaches are what? In Chinese, they're called 头痛, right? What are the two top headaches? One is cost of hiring, which is high. And of course, people wrong hires causing you damages. If you address both of these, your ROI in investing in a proper background screening exercise can be more than 100%. All right, and I've calculators to prove that if you want to see. So what if you don't do it? Like, for example, it's another profile case, right? In countries like Australia and the US, they even do a detailed tenant screening. In some countries, of course, you can't, because you just really want to rent out your house and just give it to anyone, right? But I'm sure some of you have heard of stories, even in Asia, where you rent out to the wrong people and it becomes so ugly, even in Airbnb cases, right? So you really need to know who you hire. And I'm sure you've also read about in the gig economy, where you hire people on short-term projects and they realize that, oops, this guy doesn't know how to do the web development he was marketing. All the reviews were fake. So how do I really check it out? Which is why we've integrated with a lot of gig platforms, with HRMS, ATS platforms, to make sure that there's a component to actually check out the person thoroughly before you onboard them, right? So what are the typical kind of things you should be doing, right? What are the kind of checks you could be doing? So again, because I'd like to split it into security firewall and make it look like an integrity firewall later, right? So again, today the candidates you hire, our panelists here, I think a lot of us have studied, worked, lived in multiple countries. So you should be able to do a background check on anyone across the globe, right? Like in our case, we support 150 countries, right? So if the person has any criminal background, any civil cases against a person that you need to be worried about, right? And then let me just put on the spotlight here so you can see what I'm pointing at. Yeah. And then global sanctions like Interpol checks, like AML, anti-money laundering, sexual offenses, drug trafficking, political exposed person, adverse media footprint. Like again, I said, use my example, put my name. If I said anything negatively in any media, yes, my favorite social media screening. I think my two earlier friends talked a lot about this. This is, yes, it's a good place to look for people, but it's also a fantastic place to use machine language to go through your entire history. And based on what a candidate posts, what they share, what they comment, what they allow themselves to be tagged in, to look out for derogatory indicators in terms of racism, sexual stuff, radicalism, politically sensitive stuff, terrorism, intolerance at work. There's a lot of derogatory indicators we look for. And today, this is the number one check for us because a lot of people want to know a complete insight on the candidate, and they even do it on existing employees, of course, with all the data privacy, consent, compliant consents being collected. Because you also have cases of people bitching about their bosses, sorry for choice of word, or about their bosses or the company on social media, and it's not good because whoever's going to work with your company is going to see, let's say you're selling to someone, and they would actually go into the social media and see what kind of person are you. Everybody does that, right? So it's very important that your social media footprint of your people are really clean. So this is one good thing you should be doing. Of course, if you use machine language, it gets you a lot of data points. Google, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Weibo, all that, right? Sex offenses or fact check. Of course, you need to make sure people don't fake IDs. It's also a problem even in Singapore. Credit is clean. Do they have any bankruptcy, which we heard about? Now I think more is going to happen. Of course, you can argue that if it's a person bankrupt, it's going to work harder to pay it off, but also make sure they declare it, right? Because you don't want to be hiring a bankrupt person in a critical finance role. And then again, I've seen, you can just buy me a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. I can tell you tons of stories I've seen around the globe. There's plenty of stories you don't want to hear. Financial regulatory, like your HKMA or MAS, is this guy not allowed to trade? Conflicting directorships that this person could be having, right? Are there, which you need to know. So these are all kind of fact checks you can do by subscribing to millions of databases or use background screening providers to help you. And then of course you have the education employment, which I would call it under the integrity checks. This is again very important because certificate faking is a big problem. If you go on to Talking Point show on my conference page, you will see I'm in that show where Steven, the host, actually fakes his own certificate to prove the point. It's really easy to fake it. $5 I can buy a certificate from any university you want. I think it's going to happen more because people really want to get a job. So it's very important for you to verify with the source. And of course, employment, did the person really work there? The title, salary, all these kinds of things. So these are all the kinds of things you should be doing in your detailed background checks. I'm just looking at the time very quickly. I better move on fast. And of course, you can always outsource it or you can do it yourself as well. But it's very important to know that you need to be able to do it across the countries. And again, make sure that you know how to do it. Like for example, you do in China, you need a consent letter in Putonghua. In Japan, you need a Japanese consent letter. So you need to know all the cultural, regulatory requirement differences when you're background checking a person from different countries, right? And of course, when you're working with any vendor, if you do not want to do it yourself, then make sure that there's a proper platform, there's a tech-enabled platform for you to do this very quickly, and the cost and the turnaround time must be fast, and make sure all the security and personal data it's all taken care of as well. And of course, when you get the final report, you should have all the hyperlinks, you should have all the data points, actual source files from the vendors, right? Proof that the work was really done. So all that should come in your report, right? And and of course, what checks would you do on who? So for non-financial clients, they probably will do fewer checks. Financial clients will do more checks. So you need to sit down and discuss, what kind of checks should I do based on the risk level? How many years should I check? How many different types of checks I should do? So all these depends on the risk posed by the different rules. And of course, you can stretch this whole thing to companies as well. Before you work with a company, before you open up credit terms to a company, especially now, really, really important to do even a due diligence on a company before you work with them, right? So this also become very important. So individual background checks can be stretched to company level as well, right? So that's my quick overview. You can always drop us a note or contact us through Just Login. I have a white paper to sort of give you all the best practices how to do it based on your industry or based on your role. Drop us a note. My team will be glad to send you a white paper. And of course, we can take questions in the email as well. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Over to you. Just Login.
Thank you so much, Cannon. Quite interesting to see all the different tools you can use to find more information on people. Would definitely love to hear your crazy stories as well in the future. So I think now, before we go into Q&A, I think all of the panelists can open their cameras as well and get ready to answer. But just three quick things. Just a reminder, we will be sending the slides in the presentation, so don't worry about that. Secondly, I'd like to emphasize recruitment is really the first step in maintaining a healthy business, but it's also about maintaining your workforce afterwards and having good HR management systems to really nurture your workforce and ensure they have all the necessary access to data and resources that will help them during these times. And then lastly, just a reminder that we do have our webinar next week as well, so sign up. How to manage payroll expenses and month-end closing remotely. Really great speakers, Chu Hao and Christian. So with that, let's go into Q&A. So we have a mix of questions from different periods. Let's go with the first one for Kenan. While hiring contractor, is it worth it to do detailed checks, assuming using third-party organizations, since we aren't specialists in verification checks? My query is, since contractors only hired for a limited tenure.
Oh yeah, the risks are, if I've worked with companies like the banks and the international schools, where they hire people on short-term, even 2 to 3 months project. It could be a cleaning contractor coming, it could be a driver, security guard, food caterers. They background check all of them, because for you to pose a risk or even to molest a child in a school, for example, you only need 3 minutes. So as long, only after they check, they actually let into the gate, right? So a lot of them do contractors. In fact, contractor screening is become a big topic by itself, really, because they are even more risky. They're even riskier than a long-term employee at times. So, which is why it has to be across the board: part-time, temporary, and full-time employees.
All right, follow-up question. How common is it for social services organizations to conduct a detailed check as what you had shared with us?
Social service. Okay, so I've seen, if you talk about 15 years ago, only government and banks used to do background checks. Today, I see every industry is doing it, and small, medium enterprise is a huge tier of clients for us as well. So it's really important for them to see I mean, you just can't afford to get a wrong hire. They can just rub off, your entire revenue position, right? So social services or non-profit, we have seen everyone is doing checks now. And because it becomes so cost effective and fast because of tools. I think one of the questions Ing is asking, any tools available? Yes, we have tools like in ones we have a platform called Screen Global, where you just go in, place an order, check it out, and then the report comes to you, right? And so there's a lot of ways to do it. If you want to do it yourself, of course, you can subscribe to the different country databases and try to do that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Next up, we have a question for Recruiter Pal. In the current market, you have lots of job seekers. How do you identify those who are just wanting a short-term job and not aligned to the mission?
Okay. I think that's a very valid question. We do have essential services employers that are also just looking for transitory, employees at this point in time. So it works both ways. But if you're looking for something more permanent, and hopefully you would want the candidate to stay with the company even after the job market improves, I think one of the very good things that you can ask is about why the person is applying. What's the motivation, right? It boils down to the kind of interview questions that you ask, and you can elicit quite a lot of very interesting comments, right? Like, asking the person again, like what we mentioned, why did the person choose to leave, and having a good understanding about the track record, which you can glean from the person's CV, right? But nothing beats asking the person, face to face, either through an e-interview or which is the other option of face-to-face in the office, which is not possible for Singapore companies right now. But having that questions out there and putting the expectations, and having that commitment, even just saying outright will actually help you a lot. there's no point in guessing. So I think a lot of times the recruiters that are, looking at candidates, it doesn't hurt them to just ask, like, hey, for this position, we're really looking for someone who can grow with us, particularly for small and medium businesses that they cannot afford to always be training people and getting people ready only to have them leave for another bigger organization when the opportunity comes. So that's one part. The second part that I would recommend is to really look into whether you're providing the right environment for the candidate to stay long term, because it works both ways.
All right, follow-up questions to that. In e-interviewing, are there special nuances that can be caught compared to face-to-face interviews?
It's a very good question, John. We got the sensing from the questions that came on board that e-interview tends to be a little bit lower as compared to physical meeting with the candidates. Of course, there are some nuances that will be missed. Like, for example, if the person turns up and makes special arrangements during the workday, a lot of times how they go about arranging this, it says a lot, and how they present themselves also it's a lot clearer or able to see through a face-to-face physical meeting. Whereas e-interview, you could be, in the toilet and you could have a very nice virtual background like mine and you wouldn't know, right? But I guess, having the ability to actually see them and ask them questions and see how they respond, it would be similar, no matter whether they are in a virtual or e-interview or whether they are in a physical environment. So some of the nuances we have seen in technologies like HireVue and some of our partners like RedRight is that they're able to detect, some of the visual cues, and that's also part of AI training. But I guess, that is useful to add to your list of assessing the candidate, but nothing beats the human-to-human interaction and asking the right questions to elicit the kind of response from the candidate.
It's always about asking the right questions. Thank you very much. Next question is, I believe, for Julio. What are some of the differentiating initiatives for employer branding?
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So differentiating initiatives, so how someone can really stand out. So in terms of differentiating initiatives, I think it's going back to also figuring out what makes you different, like what is that sort of 10%. So I wouldn't look to what other people are doing so much. You always got to see what your competitors are doing, but you're just trying to figure out what's sort of authentic about you, what's really the real DNA and culture, and then putting that into a story. So I think the more you stay true to that, the more you will have that sort of differentiation. And then it's about, where you're going to put that and in what form. But I think if you stick to that, then I think you'll always be, having a good start.
Perfect. Next question, I believe is directed to Christine, but I think all of you can touch on this if you want. Is it advisable for a company to organize first interview via e-interview as a standard practice and proceed the next interview in person after the first round is successful?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Recently there was this news about the fact that people actually 80%, at least in Singapore, of the employees actually surveyed love to work from home even after the circuit breaker period ended. It underlines some shifts, right, in the way we work. And for recruiters, I think one of the very pertinent question that the audience is asking is, should this be the MO from now on? Should we always do e-recruiting via interviews via Zoom or MS Teams or Skype, right? Whichever tools you have. And I actually recommend this as an initial catch-up, because it's a lot less effort on both sides. It's no less tiring. I think that's one thing that we have to adhere to, but it is far easier for the candidate to make arrangements for an e-interview rather than to go down physically to the office. So that's my take on it.
I just also like to add as well, like I think you're right, Christine. I think definitely the future is heading there. I also would just take into consideration like the sort of level of the role, because there are some nuances in roles, and it can be very hard to hire a certain level and certain people. So, you know, that sort of face-to-face interaction is so critical. And it's, even if you don't end up hiring that person, it's also got you to sort of present yourself to that one sort of person. So I do agree, but you might need to sort of like try and gauge the candidates and what they might want as well, and then sort of go from there.
Next question, how do we authenticate a candidate's ID via e-interview? Canon, Christine?
Yeah, so when I do it for my own hiring of my people, what we do is first we will ask them to point up the ID in the e-interview, because we have remote employees in different parts of the world. So obviously, you can't do face interviews, right? And they need to hold the ID to make sure it's a real person, because we have seen people. In fact, the most extreme case we saw in Australia was a lady actually used a twin sister to go through the interview, and then the actual person was different. So it has the limitations, right? Which is why you need a lot of data points, right? You need your detailed interviewing processes to make sure that you really got the right person, right? But again, that is one way. And of course, nowadays, it's a bit like a KYC mechanism, right? That's what they use in the blockchain. And then once you get that verified, then you start with the questioning and all that. So even the interviewing techniques is a bit different when you do an e-interview compared to an actual physical face-to-face interviewing. So those need to be considered as well.
If I could add to Kana's point, the story was really wow. Plus points for using your twin sister.
Yeah.
So for Christine's question, I think for our point of view, via our system, we are able to send authenticated link via the platform to their designated email address. So if are we saying that it's fail-proof? Not really. If the person decides to use her twin sister or somebody to impersonate him or herself, then yeah, we can't actually verify that. But you know, there is a certain level of trust that the person is able to handle the interview of his own, because at the end of the day, it's the person that's going to turn up for work someday when we actually end our circuit breaker.
Yes.
All right, and there's another question for you, Christine. This person asked, I have tried 2 e-interviews. It is not easy to get a good sense during the interview in comparison to face-to-face. How can we nicely end the interview without damaging the experience or maybe relationships for everyone if it's not a good fit?
Okay. I guess, for Amos' question, it was used as the initial screening tool. So e-interview would be one way of getting to know the candidate beyond the CV or the application form that the person has, sent in. If Amos is actually focusing on like, okay, this is clearly not a good fit. Somehow, somewhere, during the e-interview, the candidate has, shown certain aspects that made Amos realize that actually it's not going to be a good fit. We would recommend, having, putting it nicely and question or give that candidate a chance to rectify. That means like if let's say the person was like clearly late for an interview, that can happen whether it's a physical meeting or not, and you could actually give the person the benefit of the doubt and ask him, like, hey, it's a pretty bad reflection if you were to turn up late for an e-interview. So we would be very concerned if that is something that you struggle with, right? Time management. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit about it. So I think being open with the candidate, whether it's an e-interview or a physical interview, would go a long way.
Thank you. Next question, I believe, is quite open. Could you share about the hiring landscape now? May I know firms will defer from hiring through external recruitment firms because they may want to reduce costs, especially during this time, making candidates to apply directly to a firm stand a better chance?
Yeah. So if you oh, sorry, go ahead. You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, Kanan, you're the best person to get started.
Yeah, so we work with obviously recruitment companies as well because they send the candidates to us to get them background checked. So a lot of them, like Randstad, Michael Page, all the big guys, um, it really depends on your recruitment strategy and whether you have the budgets as well, right? So I think it's a very subjective thing. And in the first place, well, why even using a recruitment company versus a job portal? Or there's a lot of ways of hiring people now. I don't think so. You should just change your recruitment strategy and try something you've never tested before, and then say that I didn't get the right candidates. Or if this is a good time for you to really check out there, you think that a lot of candidates are out there, that's something you can check out as well. But yesterday I read a source which said that, from a very reliable source, saying that 60% of employees are looking to change jobs after COVID-19, which is quite crazy. I thought that people would stick to the jobs and hold on tight, but the study was quite interesting, and I'm going to pull out the article and maybe share with you guys. It actually said people are going to leave, so which means there are going to be good candidates out there, and I don't think so. It's like a buyer time where you're going to shop for a lot of people because a lot of people are going to be jobless. I don't think so. So I think good people will be still hard to come by, whether it's crisis or no crisis. So I think it really depends on the recruitment strategy which works for you. That's my perspective. Over to you, Christine.
I was thinking Julio would be a very good person to speak about it, because earlier he shared that he actually was part of the recruiting landscape as a recruiter. So I thought maybe Julio, you could want to give your take on this.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I've seen it through different phases, through financial crisis and working with different organizations. So definitely things always change. Companies will definitely reduce the more costly channels. So of course, recruitment agencies are always the first one to sort of cut out, which was tough when I was recruiting. But I think, they will still use recruiting for very strategic roles. At the end of the day, there are critical roles, and boutique recruitment or recruiters can be very good for that. I think, it's interesting that you mentioned that after COVID-19, 60% of candidates are going to be looking for a job. And I think as an employer, that's, if you have your pick, that's always great. I guess one of the important things to remember is that, you might have more candidates, and you want to also still make sure that attention to the candidate experience. Candidates will remember them. And so later on, once it switches and it becomes more candidate market, they'll sort of remember. So yeah, there's all these things that sort of come and go, but it's just sort of kind of maintaining, the same practices, the same good practices. And I think one other important thing, and that's something that will shift as well, is if you are relying on your recruitment agencies a lot, like typically you want to get to a level of like where you're using recruiters around 10 to 20%. If you're using recruitment agencies more than 20%, it means that there are some other things you could do, like employer branding, building internal referrals. Because if you can get like 40% of your hires through internal referral, that cuts down your use of more costly channels. But how you do that is through employer branding. It's constantly building that sort of positive brand, and then other people do the work for you. Like your employees go and be your spokespeople, they refer people in. People just hear about you through friends, and they come to your website to apply. So this is something that changes during sort of times where people need to be a bit more conscious of spending. Is trying to get your network, your employees to sort of help you with the recruiting effort.
Thanks, Julio. Christine, did you also want to add something to this? Or they covered it?
I think the only other perspective that I would want to add is if the question was asked from a job seeker point of view, because I think Julio covered perfectly about how companies look at recruitment companies as a channel, and if it's a more costly channel, then in terms of cost cutting, this will be one of the first to go, unless the role is critical and it's hard to fill. But if from a job seeker point of view, I guess there is actually no harm if you are in the job market right now to also tap on recruitment agencies, because they are, after all, a complementary source to job portals and other referral networks and channels like that. So it's really no harm if some of them have approached you and wanted to present you to for some of the roles that are available. So it's no harm. I would really say the intent to apply is very strong for candidates. So it's really about expanding your network personally.
Perfect. it seems we've answered most of the questions. Of course, if any of the audience does questions specifically for people, feel free to reach out directly. Thank you so much to all of the viewers for joining, for the great questions, and thank you to the panelists, Christine, Julio, Cannon. Thank you so much for joining. Again, we have a webinar next week, so tune in and wish you guys all the best. Stay safe and good luck.
You guys.
Thank you.
Thomas. Thank you, everybody.